Hey there! Welcome to ADB Stories. Hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, let's get into today's story. The road into Havenport shimmered under the August sun, heat waves rising like ghosts off the blacktop. Daniel Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his aging Chevy, eyes sharp behind a pair of scratched aviators. He'd been driving for 4 hours with only gas station coffee and questions to keep him going. Questions about his daughter. Questions he hadn't been able to stop asking for weeks. Ivy hadn't answered his calls in 11 days. The last text had come a week before that, and it was the kind of message that wasn't really from her. Polite, clipped, emotionless. "All good here, Dad. Nathan's work trip extended. Just laying low and catching up on some home stuff." That wasn't how Ivy spoke. Ivy used too many exclamation points, rambled in texts, and always ended with "love you." This time there was none of that, just silence. Daniel had known silence intimately. 40 years as a cop will do that to a man. Silence on the radio before a call goes bad. Silence in a dark hallway when you know someone's behind the door. But this silence? This was the kind that clung to your ribs and whispered that something was wrong. Havenport was the kind of place that had signs welcoming you with cursive fonts and flower beds maintained by the Historical Society. It was moneyed and proud of it. Ivy had moved here 2 years ago after marrying Nathan Hale, a software engineer with soft hands and an old money family that Daniel never quite trusted. The Hale estate sat at the end of Waverly Crest, the kind of street where every house looked like it had been designed to impress and intimidate. Circular driveways, hedges trimmed to perfection, stone lions on pillars. Daniel parked his dusty truck behind a Lexus SUV and stepped out, sweat already gathering beneath the collar of his flannel shirt. The Hale home loomed 3 stories high, all white columns and blue shutters. As he approached the wide front steps, the door opened. Lucinda Hale stood in the entryway, tall and slender in a sleeveless beige dress that looked like it belonged in a fashion catalog for old money. Her silver blonde hair was pulled back into a bun, so tight it seemed to pull her skin taut. Her expression was pleasant, practiced, and cold as a marble tomb. "Daniel," she said, as if tasting something sour, "what a surprise." "Where's my daughter?" he asked without smiling. "She's downstairs," Lucinda replied, and something in her tone made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Working on a personal project. She prefers the quiet. I'll go see her." Lucinda hesitated just a breath too long. "It's not really a good time." Daniel didn't answer. He stepped past her. Through the air-conditioned chill of the grand foyer, the house smelled of lemon polish and money. Crystal chandeliers glittered above Persian rugs. Portraits of ancestors hung on the walls, all severe-looking men and women whose eyes seemed to judge you from centuries ago. The stairs to the basement were tucked behind the kitchen, painted in the same shade of eggshell white as the rest of the house. As he descended, the temperature dropped, but the air turned dense. The lights were dim, casting long shadows along the cinder block walls. He knocked once on the basement door. A beat of silence. Then a voice. Weak. "Dad?" The door opened and Daniel's heart broke a little. Ivy stood in front of him, her skin pale and slick with sweat. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, damp and unwashed. She wore an oversized sweatshirt and yoga pants that hung off her frame like clothes she'd slept in. Behind her, the room was small, too small, a mattress on the concrete floor. A plastic tub of clothes, a folding table with a fan that buzzed without conviction. There were no windows, no natural light. A single overhead bulb glowed like a prison interrogation room. "What the hell is this?" Daniel stepped inside and felt the heat punch him in the chest. "Dad, you can't be here," Ivy said quickly, her eyes darting toward the stairs. "Lucinda doesn't allow—" "Doesn't allow what?" His voice echoed in the small space. "Doesn't allow a grown woman to live like a human being?" "It's just while Nathan's gone," she whispered. "They have a rule. Non-blood family members can't stay in the main house if he's away. It's just tradition." "Tradition?" Daniel turned a slow circle, taking in the windowless room, the fan, the sweat-stained sheets. "This isn't tradition, Ivy. This is control. This is punishment. She says it's about boundaries, that it's not appropriate for me to be upstairs when Nathan's not here, that the Hale family has standards." "Jesus Christ," Daniel muttered. "How long have you been sleeping down here?" 6 weeks. He had to sit. His knees were suddenly too old, too tired to keep standing. He dropped onto the mattress and felt the sag of it, the thinness, the lack of anything resembling comfort. "They let me use the upstairs bathroom in the mornings," Ivy added quickly, "before anyone wakes up." Daniel looked up at her, eyes wet with fury he hadn't felt since his last bad case. "You're their daughter-in-law, not the help. And even the help gets a goddamn room with a window." "I didn't want to make trouble," Ivy whispered. "Lucinda says she'll talk to Nathan and explain how ungrateful I've been if I complain. She says it'll hurt his job prospects if people see family drama." Daniel stood slowly, every movement full of purpose now. "You're packing a bag," he said. "You're coming with me. Tonight." "Dad, no." His voice dropped low. "The way it used to when he stood between victims and abusers. You don't argue with bullies. You don't reason with them. You don't let them make the rules. You stand up and you take your damn life back." Ivy looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel saw his daughter in those tired eyes, not the frightened shell who lived in the Hales' basement, but the fighter he'd raised. She nodded. "Okay." Together, they walked up the stairs, Ivy with a duffel bag in hand, Daniel with fury in his chest. Lucinda stood in the foyer, frozen, her hands clasped like a woman about to pray or strike. "We'll be in touch," Daniel said, brushing past her. She didn't respond, but her silence said everything. And Daniel Carter had heard enough silence to know what came next. War. The sun was setting by the time Daniel pulled into his driveway back in Norcross Hollow. The small ranch-style home looked exactly as it had for the last 15 years, modest, well-kept, with sun-bleached siding and a screen door that creaked when you opened it. Ivy used to call it the quiet house, a place where the world didn't get in unless you invited it. He watched her in the passenger seat as she stared at the familiar front porch. Her hands were clenched in her lap, gripping the strap of her duffel bag. "You okay?" Daniel asked. "I don't know." Her voice was hoarse from more than heat. "I think so." Daniel nodded, said nothing, and got out. He opened the front door and turned on the lights. The house smelled like pine sol and black coffee. Ivy stepped inside like someone who hadn't crossed a threshold in years. She paused by the kitchen, running her hand across the worn butcher block counter. "You kept everything the same." "Didn't see any reason to change it," he said, setting her bag by the couch. "It's still home." That night, she slept in her childhood bedroom. Daniel didn't ask questions. Not yet. He knew the look in her eyes. the 1,000-yard stare that meant her brain hadn't caught up to her body yet. He'd seen that look on survivors, victims of violence who walked free but hadn't found safety in their own heads. The next morning, over black coffee and toast, he began. "How long did it start before the basement?" he asked gently. Ivy sipped her coffee slowly. "Almost from the beginning," she said. "Right after the wedding." Daniel leaned back, letting her speak. Lucinda would say little things, like how I shouldn't wear certain clothes to dinner, or how I wasn't refined enough. She called it coaching. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not coaching. That's indoctrination." She said I should take etiquette classes, learn how to present myself better for Nathan's sake. He said nothing, but his grip on the mug tightened. She told me I should cook traditional meals. The Hales have a chef, but she said it was important I know my place in the kitchen. Nathan thought it was ridiculous, but he never confronted her. He'd just roll his eyes and say, "That's my mom for you." Did you tell him what she was doing? Bits and pieces. But it always came out like I was complaining. I didn't want to come between them. She paused. I didn't want him to see me as the problem. Daniel looked at his daughter, the same girl who used to argue with teachers in high school when they marked her wrong on test questions she knew were right. That fire had dimmed. Ivy, when a person uses love to make you stay silent, that's not love. That's leverage. She looked down at her lap, fingers tracing the rim of her mug. I kept thinking, if I could just win Lucinda over, everything would be okay, that if I proved myself, she'd accept me. She didn't want to accept you. She wanted to erase you. The silence stretched between them, heavy and bitter. She told me the basement would build character, that I was lucky to have my own space. She even joked that it would prepare me for motherhood, sleep deprivation, discomfort, lack of privacy, like it was a trial I had to endure to be worthy of her son. Daniel stood slowly, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a legal pad. He opened a drawer, took out a pen. "We're writing everything down," he said. "Names, dates, words, actions, everything." "What for?" "Because I'm not letting this go, Ivy. You might not want revenge, but I want justice." He spent the day making phone calls. First to an old friend, Samantha Griggs, a civil attorney with a sharp tongue and a reputation for eviscerating abusers in court. Then to a retired PI who owed him a favor. Then to Ronnie Bell, a former colleague now working for Child and Family Services, who had connections in the social abuse network. By 3 p.m., Daniel was sitting at his dining table, surrounded by files, printouts, and sticky notes. He was building a case, not just for court, but for public judgment. That evening, he returned to Havenport. This time, he wasn't going to knock politely. He parked across the street from the Hale estate and walked to the door with the same confidence he'd used when serving warrants. George Hale opened it, wearing golf shorts and a sweater vest, like he'd stepped out of a leisure wear catalog. "Daniel," he said, his voice slow, calm. "This is a surprise." "You have no idea," Daniel said. Lucinda appeared behind her husband, arms crossed, mouth tight. "If you've come to stir up more drama, I suggest you reconsider. Our son will be home in 2 weeks. We'd prefer to avoid ugliness." Daniel laughed. "You locked my daughter in a basement for 6 damn weeks and you're worried about ugly?" She was not locked anywhere. She had no key. She had no money. She was under surveillance and given limited access to food and water. You called it tradition. I call it abuse. Lucinda's lips thinned. She chose to remain in the basement. She agreed to our house rules. under coercion. That's not consent. George stepped forward, puffing up like a man used to giving orders. You're making a serious mistake, Carter. This could backfire on your daughter. This town values its traditions. We've contributed to this community for generations. Daniel pulled out his phone. I've already spoken to your neighbors, to your contractor, to a former housemaid. You're not respected, George. You're feared. That's not the same thing. Lucinda's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Try me, Daniel said. You messed with the wrong man's daughter. He turned on his heel and walked away. Behind him, the air seemed to buzz with tension. He knew they were watching from the windows as he got back in his truck. The war had started. It wasn't going to be fought with fists. Not this time. But Daniel Carter had worn a badge for 30 years. He knew how to build a case, how to shine light into dark places. And now, he had a mission again. He wasn't just coming for revenge. He was coming to make sure no one like Lucinda Hale ever did this to another woman again. The next morning, Daniel Carter stood in front of his kitchen window, sipping his coffee and watching the slow movement of the neighborhood. Kids on bikes, a jogger, a woman walking her golden retriever. It was a quiet morning in Norcross Hollow. Calm, familiar, decent. Nothing like Havenport, where everything looked polished and perfect. But underneath was rot. I made a list, Ivy said behind him. Daniel turned. She stood barefoot in the kitchen doorway, her shoulders a little straighter than the night before, her voice less fragile. She held a yellow notepad, the pages covered in her looping handwriting. Names, events, the house rules, what they said, what they took. He took the pad from her gently, reading the first few lines. It was detailed, painfully so. March 5th. Lucinda told me to stop using the upstairs bathroom after 7 p.m., said it was disruptive to the house's rhythm. March 9th. George called my wardrobe pedestrian. Said I should dress like a Hale, not like someone who shops at malls. April 1st. Told Nathan's childhood friend I was emotionally delicate in front of a dinner guest. I remember thinking that if I could just make myself small enough, quiet enough, good enough, I'd finally be accepted, Ivy said. But it never mattered. I was always a guest in their house, never family. Daniel closed the notepad and looked at her. You're not small. You never were. They just wanted you to believe that so they could feel big. Ivy nodded slowly, the beginnings of resolve settling in her expression. Daniel made 2 phone calls that morning. The first was to Melinda Reyes, a therapist who specialized in psychological abuse and coercive control. She'd helped dozens of women document their experiences in emotionally manipulative households for both court proceedings and recovery. Melinda agreed to meet Ivy the next day. The second call was to Mike Thurman, an HVAC technician who'd worked in Havenport for over a decade. He wasn't the contractor who'd originally serviced the Hale estate, but he knew who was: Robert Gant, owner of Gant Climate Services. Daniel found Robert's number in an online directory and dialed. Gant here. The voice on the other end said, deep and southern. Mr. Gant, my name's Daniel Carter. I need to ask you about a service call you did at the Hale estate in Havenport. Silence, then. You law enforcement? Retired. But what I'm looking into? It concerns abuse. My daughter was the victim. I need to know what you saw, what was requested, and what your professional opinion was. Another pause. Then Robert's voice lowered. I remember that job. Weirdest one I've had in a while. Robert explained that Lucinda Hale had requested an evaluation of the property's detached basement space. She'd wanted to know if it could be made more comfortable for private use. Robert had inspected it. No insulation, no air vents, no proper electrical wiring for an HVAC unit. Just a plug-in fan, a dehumidifier, and a single light bulb. I told her flat out, it wasn't suitable for living, not even short term. And her response? She smiled, said it was temporary, just for a quiet, creative retreat. I gave her an estimate for what it'd take to bring it up to code. Full ductwork, insulation, subflooring. Never heard back. Would you be willing to provide a written statement? I already keep job logs, dated, with service notes. I'll send it over. Daniel hung up, heart pounding. Every piece mattered. Every word, every date, every observation. The truth was building into a structure that could no longer be ignored. That afternoon, he drove to Havenport again, not to the Hale estate this time, but to Mrs. Jolene Cartwright, a former maid who'd worked for the Hales for 7 years before leaving suddenly 6 months ago. Jolene lived in a modest bungalow on the west side of town. When Daniel introduced himself and said Ivy's name, she immediately opened the door. I always liked that girl, Jolene said, offering him sweet tea in a glass that smelled faintly of lemon dish soap. Didn't belong in that house, but she tried so hard to be kind. That's what made it worse. Why did you quit? Daniel asked. Jolene hesitated. The last straw was seeing Ivy cleaning the guest bathroom at 6 a.m. Lucinda told me she needed to learn responsibility since she was living there rent-free. But Ivy wasn't lazy. I'd see her scrubbing baseboards, running errands for Lucinda, even folding the family laundry. That girl worked harder than anyone in that house. She didn't have her own room? Not once Nathan left. They moved her out of the guest suite and into the basement. Lucinda said it was just for now, but she took away her key card. Told me to keep the upstairs doors locked at night. I hated it. Felt wrong. Jolene agreed to write an affidavit, detailing what she'd witnessed and confirming that Ivy's isolation wasn't voluntary. It was enforced by house rules, threats, and withheld privileges. That night, back in Norcross Hollow, Daniel laid out everything on his dining table. Ivy helped him sort it. They didn't speak much, but every document, every timeline, every witness statement placed another stone in the foundation of their case. "Do you think it'll work?" Ivy asked softly. "Do you think people will believe me?" Daniel looked at her and saw the woman she was becoming again. The one he'd raised. The one who used to argue with professors and organize charity drives and laugh too loud at sitcoms. "I don't need people to believe you," he said. "I need the right people to see the truth. The rest, they'll follow." Ivy looked down at the timeline they'd drawn across the table. 6 feet of dates, events, conversations, texts. "There's one more thing," she said. Daniel waited. "I think Lucinda intercepted my messages to Nathan," she whispered. She managed all his calls, filtered his emails, insisted on weekly family video chats where she'd be sitting just off screen. I don't think he ever saw the worst of it. "That's another kind of abuse," Daniel said, writing it down. "Communication control, isolation. You weren't just living in the basement, Ivy. You were in a prison." She nodded slowly. A prison that smelled like vanilla candles and had a pool in the backyard. Daniel looked at his daughter and realized something important. The worst cages were the ones built with politeness and polished silverware, where the doors were always unlocked, but you were too ashamed to walk through them. But she'd walked through. And now the people who built that cage were going to answer for it. In a town like Havenport, money whispered and image screamed. The Hales knew that. They had built their lives on it. Every donation Lucinda made to the Historical Society, every photo op George posed for in the Sunday paper, every gala they hosted with champagne fountains and harpists in the foyer, it was all designed to reinforce one thing: we are the standard. And Daniel Carter was going to burn that standard to the ground. He sat at his dining room table late into the night, poring over the printed application Lucinda had submitted to the Havenport Heritage Preservation Committee. The Hales were requesting a $75,000 state-funded grant to restore and enhance their estate as a historic property. According to their proposal, they wanted to convert the old carriage house into a guest suite for visiting artists and historians. The documents were full of buzzwords: cultural value, community enrichment, architectural significance. But one line caught Daniel's eye. The Hale family maintains exemplary residential and family standards in alignment with the traditions of Havenport's legacy. He read it 3 times slowly. Exemplary standards. He pictured Ivy curled on a stained mattress in that airless basement. He remembered her chapped lips and the way her eyes flinched every time someone said Lucinda's name. And then he smiled. That sentence was going to be their undoing. 2 days later, Daniel sat down with Deputy Leah Sorensen, a friend of his from the academy who'd traded homicide for small-town investigations years ago. She was blunt, smart, and allergic to bullshit. His kind of people. He slid a thick folder across the table in her office at the sheriff's substation. "What's this?" she asked, flipping it open. "Documented abuse, isolation, coercive control, unsafe living conditions. Target George and Lucinda Hale." Leah raised an eyebrow. "This for real?" "Every bit. Witnesses, photos, medical records, timeline, statements from a contractor, a former employee, a neighbor, a therapist. And that's just the first layer." Leah thumbed through the contents, her jaw tightening. "Jesus, I remember when Ivy married into that family, everyone talked like she'd hit the jackpot." "She hit something, all right," Daniel muttered. "A concrete wall with no windows." Leah sighed. "Legally, it's tough. No bruises, no overt threats, but..." She tapped the page. "This part about Lucinda controlling Nathan's communications, the basement, the financial dependence, I can build something on that, especially if Ivy's willing to testify." "She is," Daniel said. "But I'm not just looking for a court battle. I want to rip the mask off publicly." Leah smirked. "Planning a reckoning?" He nodded once. "Heritage Committee meets in 3 days. They're reviewing the Hale application." "Damn, you're going for the throat." "No," Daniel said quietly. "I'm going for the reputation. That's where it bleeds." The day before the meeting, Ivy sat in Melinda Reyes's office, fingers curled tightly around a mug of herbal tea. "I thought about leaving so many times," she said. "But every time I got close, Lucinda would twist it. She'd say I was overreacting, that I'd hurt Nathan's chances at a promotion if I caused drama, that she was protecting the brand of the family." Melinda nodded. "That's not protection. That's programming." I stopped recognizing myself. I wasn't even angry anymore, just tired. Melinda handed her a clipboard. "You're not tired now. You're awake. And that's when people like her get scared." Ivy signed the formal affidavit, her hands only shaking a little. Meanwhile, Daniel visited Judith Caraway, the Heritage Committee's vice chair. A widow in her 70s, Judith had long been known as the conscience of the committee. She believed in preservation, but she believed in integrity more. "I'd like to speak during public comment," Daniel told her, "but I need more than 2 minutes." Judith narrowed her eyes. "This is about the Hales, isn't it?" "It is. You'll be making enemies." "Not the first time." She studied him a long moment, then nodded. "You'll have 5 minutes." Word spread fast in Havenport, as it always did. By the time the evening of the meeting arrived, the town hall was standing room only, 100 folding chairs, all filled. Local journalists, school board members, 2 pastors, and even the coffee shop barista who always got Ivy's name wrong, Evie, were all in attendance. Lucinda and George sat near the front, dressed in navy blue and bone white, looking like they'd just stepped out of a catalog for genteel influence. Their smiles were tight, eyes alert. Daniel watched them from the back row, flanked by Ivy and Leah. His folder rested on his lap like a loaded weapon. The committee worked through its routine items quickly: budget updates, restoration timelines, a brief presentation about a new bronze plaque for the old post office. Then came item 9, the Hale estate application. Lucinda stood and approached the podium with the elegance of someone who'd spent her entire life speaking to people who were told to listen. She glowed beneath the spotlight, voice smooth, practiced. She spoke of family legacy, of Havenport's heritage, of opening their home to the public, of community pride. Above all, she said, our family values tradition, excellence, and care for those we love. There was polite applause as she sat down. Then Chairman Eldridge cleared his throat. "Before we vote, we'll now open the floor to public comment." Daniel stood. The room stilled. He walked to the podium slowly, his boots echoing on the tile. His voice, when it came, was low, calm, controlled. "My name is Daniel Carter. My daughter is Ivy Carter Hale." He paused, scanning the room, letting the name settle. 3 months ago, Ivy was living in the basement of the Hale estate, not by choice, not for fun, but because her in-laws created a system of control, emotional, financial, psychological, that left her isolated, degraded, and in many ways imprisoned. Gasps stirred. George shifted in his seat. Lucinda remained frozen, expression tight. Daniel continued. "I have statements from a contractor who was told to inspect the basement. He warned them it wasn't safe for habitation. They ignored him." He held up a photograph, a cot, a fan, a sweat-soaked floor, and a thermometer reading 102 degrees Celsius. "I have records from a therapist, from a physician, from a former employee who was instructed not to allow Ivy upstairs during family time." He laid the documents on the podium one by one, like cards on a table. "This family, the one asking for your money, your respect, and your trust, locked their daughter-in-law in a basement, told her she wasn't blood, took her paycheck, controlled her access to food, rest, privacy, and communication, and smiled while doing it." Daniel looked directly at Lucinda. "This isn't heritage. This is rot." He stepped away from the podium, the silence behind him louder than applause. The committee sat frozen. Eldridge coughed into his hand. "I believe we'll need more time to consider this application." And in that moment, in front of half the town, the Hale illusion cracked. You could hear it, in the whispered voices, in the sidelong glances, in the slow, stunned unraveling of Lucinda's practiced smile. Outside, Ivy leaned into her father's shoulder as the town hall emptied behind them. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he said. "We did. And this was only the beginning." The arrivals terminal at LAX buzzed with the chaos of reunion. Crying babies, cell phones held overhead on FaceTime, lovers clutching bouquets. But Daniel Carter stood apart from all of it, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes scanning each disembarking passenger like a hunter, waiting for movement in the brush. Nathan Hale stepped through the automatic doors wearing a tailored navy blazer, suitcase in tow, and a look of mild confusion. He didn't see his parents. He saw Daniel. "Mr. Carter?" Nathan's voice was hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to be angry or afraid. Daniel didn't move. "Your wife's at my house." Nathan blinked. What?" "She's safe. She's recovering. You and I are going to talk." They sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop off Sepulveda. Daniel ordered black. Nathan asked for an oat milk latte, then changed his mind halfway and said regular milk was fine. Daniel slid a manila folder across the table. The same one he'd used at the Heritage Committee meeting. He said nothing, just watched. Nathan opened it and began flipping through the contents. First came the photos of the basement, of the mattress, of the sweat-stained clothes, the thermometer on the wall. Next came Ivy's medical report: dehydration, heat exhaustion, stress-related symptoms. Then the sworn statements, contractors, neighbors, the former housemaid, and finally, Ivy's own words. Daniel watched Nathan's face shift. Denial. Confusion, recognition, horror. "This can't be right," Nathan whispered. "My mother—" "No, she wouldn't." "She did," Daniel said flatly. "Ivy told me she was fine. We FaceTimed, we texted. She told you what she thought you needed to hear to protect your career. Your parents monitored every call, every message. She was never alone, never free to speak." Nathan shook his head, eyes locked on a page in the file. "She said she was cold once," he whispered. "I thought she meant emotionally." "I didn't know she meant literally." Daniel leaned forward. "Your mother controlled her life, took her income, locked her in a basement, told her she wasn't blood and didn't belong. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was by design." "She could have left," Nathan muttered, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "She stayed because she loved you, because she believed in you, and because she didn't want to be the reason your relationship with your family fell apart." Nathan sat back, staring at the wall beyond Daniel. "She could have died," he whispered. "She almost did." Silence stretched between them. Then Nathan closed the folder, slowly and carefully, like it was something sacred. "I need to see her." "You will," Daniel said, "but understand something first. If you're here to defend them or minimize what they did, I'll drive you straight back to the airport." Nathan nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I'm not here to defend anyone." Back in Norcross Hollow, Ivy was standing on the porch when they pulled up. She looked healthier, color in her cheeks, a light sweater draped over her shoulders, but she still had that slight stoop in her posture, that way of folding in on herself like someone who had lived too long, being told she took up too much space. Nathan got out of the car first. He didn't run. He didn't yell. He just walked toward her, his face unreadable. "I didn't know," he said. Ivy's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. "I thought you were busy," she whispered. "I thought you trusted them. That maybe you agreed with them." Nathan's voice cracked. "No, God, no. I was an idiot. I let them act like you were a guest instead of family. I thought you were being dramatic when you said your room felt cold. I didn't know it was a basement." She looked at him for a long time. "They told me I wasn't blood, that I didn't belong upstairs." "They're wrong," he said, stepping closer. "You're everything that house should have been." And then she fell into his arms, finally crying. Later that night, the three of them sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Ivy had eaten cereal before high school and cried into her dad's shoulder after breakups. But now there was something new, a plan. "I'm filing for legal separation," Nathan said, not just from them personally, but from the Hale family trust, the estate, the business, everything. Ivy's eyes widened. "Nathan, they made their money off cruelty," he said. "If I stay tied to that, I'm complicit. I won't be, not anymore." Daniel said nothing, just watched. Nathan turned to him. "I want to work for you," he said. "Learn the business from the bottom, hammer to nails. I don't care how long it takes." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You know anything about construction?" "I can Google fast," Nathan said with a small smile, "and I'm willing to be yelled at." Daniel chuckled, but there was pride in it. "We'll see what you're made of." 2 days later, Nathan met with a lawyer. He signed away his inheritance. The same day, Ivy's statement was submitted officially to Deputy Sorensen. The investigation into George and Lucinda Hale became a formal criminal case. Lucinda, when served with notice, went on a tear, calling mutual friends, demanding character witnesses, threatening defamation lawsuits. But the damage was done. 2 local newspapers picked up the story. "Beneath the Hales' house, abuse allegations, shake prominent family." The article included anonymous sources, excerpts from affidavits, and the Heritage Committee's decision to suspend their application. Suddenly, Lucinda's phone stopped ringing. The country club put her membership on hold. George lost 2 major clients. The mayor declined to appear at their annual fundraiser. They weren't untouchable anymore. One evening, as Daniel stood in his backyard with a wrench in hand, Ivy walked up behind him. "What are you building?" she asked. He pointed to the small structure taking shape where the old shed used to be. Insulation in place, a real bed frame inside, a working ceiling fan already spinning above. "I call it the Monroe Room," he said. "If another woman ever ends up in your shoes, she'll have somewhere to go. No judgment, no rules, just safety." Ivy swallowed hard. "You never stop protecting people, do you?" Daniel looked at his daughter, the one who had survived cruelty and pearls and wallpaper, who had walked out of the basement and into the light. "Not the ones who matter," he said. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him. He didn't hug often, but this time he did. Justice wasn't swift, but it had a heartbeat now, and it was getting louder. They called it the Hale House Gala. Every October for 12 years running, it had been the crown jewel of Havenport society. Crystal centerpieces, live quartets, silent auctions that raised hundreds of thousands. Lucinda Hale curated every detail, down to the color of the waiters' ties. But this year, the house was silent. No cars in the driveway, no event tent on the lawn, no flood of donors in silk gowns sipping champagne beside the lily pond. Just an estate, enormous and still, like a once great cathedral whose congregation had vanished overnight. Inside, Lucinda stood by the picture window in her study, staring at the empty driveway with a glass of white wine in her hand. She hadn't spoken to Nathan in weeks. He hadn't responded to her messages or emails. His phone, when she tried to call, went straight to voicemail. The last thing he had said to her in person was, "You don't get to erase the people you think are beneath you, Mother. Not anymore." George entered the room, face red from bourbon and embarrassment. "You see the paper this morning?" he asked. Lucinda didn't turn. "I did. 3 more clients dropped." He slammed the door shut behind him. "This is spiraling, Lucinda. You said we'd be fine, that this would blow over." "It will," she snapped. "Once the gossip settles, people have short memories." "Not when a deputy files criminal charges, they don't." His voice was rising. "Reckless endangerment, coercive control, fraud. Those aren't rumors anymore. That's a goddamn criminal investigation." Lucinda turned slowly. Her voice was like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "They can investigate all they want. The burden of proof is on them." George glared at her. "Your pride is going to bury us." Across town at Daniel Carter's home, Ivy sat at the kitchen table, typing carefully on her laptop. Beside her sat a neatly stacked binder with the words, "Speaking Notes, Financial Abuse and Domestic Coercion, California Legal Aid Conference." She'd been asked to share her story publicly, not just as a survivor, but as a voice of prevention. "I don't know if I'm ready," she told Daniel, who sat across from her peeling an apple with military precision. "You weren't ready for the basement either," he said. "But you survived that. You can survive a microphone." She smiled faintly. "It just feels so exposed." "Good. Let them see it. Let them know what abuse looks like when it wears pearls and says grace before dinner." Ivy closed her laptop, exhaled. "You know what's the worst part?" Daniel looked up. "I kept convincing myself it wasn't that bad, that if I just played by the rules, I'd be accepted. I almost forgot who I was trying to protect, me or them." Daniel nodded. "That's how abusers win. They make you feel complicit in your own suffering." She looked at him. "Not anymore." Nathan had started working on Daniel's crew 3 weeks earlier. The first day, he'd shown up in work boots that were too clean and a brand new flannel shirt that had never seen sweat. Frank, the site foreman, had taken one look at him and said, "You ever swung a hammer before, Harvard?" "No, sir," Nathan admitted, "but I learned fast." The crew didn't like him at first. He was too soft, too clean-cut, too hale. But Nathan didn't complain, not once. He lifted what they lifted, carried what they carried, bled when a nail split his thumb. He earned his place not with charm, but with grit. And when lunch rolled around, he sat alone at first, until one of the guys dropped beside him and handed him a thermos of soup without a word. Acceptance, Daniel thought, always looks quiet when it's real. Deputy Sorensen moved quickly. She compiled the case file with care. Ivy's medical records, witness statements, financial records, and, most damning of all, the official document showing that Lucinda had altered Ivy's bank access by posing as her legal proxy while Nathan was overseas. That was the tipping point. Forgery. A felony. When the notice arrived at the Hale estate, Lucinda stared at it with a mix of fury and disbelief. "They're accusing me of theft," she said to George, "of fraud, of endangerment." "Because that's what you did," George replied quietly, "and I let you." She turned to him, stunned. "Excuse me?" He sighed and looked out the window. "I saw what was happening. I heard the rules you made. I watched her disappear into that basement, and I told myself it wasn't my business." "That you had it under control." He took a long drink from his glass. "Turns out, control isn't the same as love." Lucinda stared at her husband. This man who had stood beside her at every gala, nodded along with every decision, and realized, perhaps for the first time in her life, that she had lost him too. The Hales tried to counterattack. They hired a crisis PR firm, filed a cease and desist letter against the newspaper, sent threatening emails to Daniel's lawyer, but it was too late. The public had already turned. Donors pulled their names from their charity events. The Heritage Committee issued a formal statement revoking their application indefinitely. An ethics review board opened an inquiry into George's financial firm, and 2 board seats were suspended pending the outcome. Their mansion, once a beacon of influence, now stood like a monument to arrogance. The curtains stayed drawn, no more flower deliveries, no visitors, just a long, slow silence. One morning, Daniel found Ivy sitting in the backyard near the Monroe room. She was sipping tea and watching a butterfly flutter over the tomatoes. "How's the speech coming?" he asked. "I finished it," she said, smiling. "And I included the basement, all of it, not just the physical stuff, the silence, the shame, the way I started to believe I deserved it." He sat beside her. "That's the part people need to hear most." She turned to him. "Do you ever stop being a protector?" "No," he said. "But now you're strong enough to protect others, too." They sat in the early morning stillness, the garden quiet around them. And somewhere across town, the house of Hale crumbled, not with a crash, but with the slow, echoing silence of a reputation turned to ash. In the weeks that followed, Ivy's speech went viral after someone from the conference recorded it and posted it online. Survivors across the country reached out, saying her story mirrored their own. The Monroe room quietly became a haven. 3 more women came, no questions, just keys and comfort. George Hale, faced with mounting legal pressure, resigned from his firm. Lucinda, now facing trial, was removed from the boards of 4 charitable organizations. At her last public appearance, no one applauded when she entered the room. John hadn't come with handcuffs and headlines. It had come with truth. And truth, as Daniel always knew, was the most dangerous weapon of all. 6 months had passed since Ivy Carter walked out of the basement and into the world again. Enough time for the bruises beneath the surface to start healing. Not all of them were gone. Some pain doesn't disappear, it just softens. But the difference was clear. She no longer flinched at the sound of her phone ringing. She no longer apologized for taking up space in a room. She no longer believed that love came with conditions. Tonight, she stood in the Monroe room, the shelter her father had built from lumber and vengeance, and turned off the reading lamp beside the bed. Their latest guest, a young mother named Carla, had arrived last week with 2 children and the clothes on their backs. Ivy had helped her find legal aid and a safe job at a florist across town. They weren't ready to leave yet, but they were stable, and in Ivy's book, that was a win. Daniel leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching his daughter with quiet pride. "She get the kids to sleep?" "Yeah." They ate 3 grilled cheese sandwiches and passed out on the couch. Ivy smiled. "You should have seen their faces when I gave them juice boxes." Sometimes juice boxes are bigger than court victories. They walked back to the house together, the evening air warm and soft with the scent of blooming tomatoes. Daniel poured 2 glasses of sweet tea and set them on the kitchen table, the same scarred oak surface where so many battles had been fought and won. Nathan walked in a few minutes later, work boots unlaced, face streaked with drywall dust. "I finally wired the porch light at the Sullivan job without shorting the whole thing out," he announced proudly. Daniel raised his glass. "That means you're officially more useful than a bag of rocks. Cheers." They laughed, an easy sound now, unforced. There had been weeks when Nathan wasn't sure if he'd ever be welcome here again, but he'd earned his way back, not through grand gestures, but by showing up. Every day, swinging a hammer, fixing what was broken, including himself. Ivy reached over and wiped a smear of dust off his cheek. "Proud of you, wiring boy." Nathan took her hand, holding it gently, reverently. "I'm proud of you, basement girl." They both laughed at the nickname now. It didn't carry shame anymore, only resilience. Later that night, as they sat under the stars on the back porch, Ivy leaned into her father's shoulder. "I'm scared sometimes," she said softly, "that I'll slip back into who I was, that I won't see the signs next time, that someone will convince me again to be small." Daniel didn't rush to answer. He took a slow sip of tea, then set the glass down. "You might forget," he said, "but I won't, and neither will Nathan. And neither will every woman you've helped since you walked out of that house." "I'm not special," she murmured. "No," he said. "You're something better. You're stronger than before, not untouched, not invincible, but stronger, because you know exactly what it costs to be broken, and you got back up anyway." She exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. Then she pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Setting an alert. Court date for Lucinda and George is next Friday. I want to be there." Daniel smiled. "You want to testify?" "I want to be seen," she said. "By them. By the town. By anyone who still thinks they're above consequences." Nathan appeared in the doorway behind them. "Mind if I sit in?" Daniel chuckled. "You hammer crooked, but your moral compass seems okay." They made room. That following week, the courthouse was packed. Ivy sat quietly near the front, hands folded in her lap, Nathan beside her, Daniel behind them, both like a silent guard dog. Lucinda arrived in a tailored gray suit, her face carefully neutral. George looked thinner, tired. The glow of entitlement had dulled, replaced with the weary pallor of people who'd spent 6 months losing everything that made them important. They avoided Ivy's eyes. The charges, coercive control, reckless endangerment, and fraud, were read aloud by the judge. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the low hum of whispered speculation. The prosecution laid out its opening case with precision, citing everything Daniel and Ivy had assembled: the photos of the basement, the financial control, the intercepted communications. And then Ivy was called to the stand. She took a deep breath, walked to the witness chair, and looked out across the courtroom. For a moment, she wasn't sure her voice would come. Then she locked eyes with Lucinda and spoke clearly. "My name is Ivy Carter Hale. For nearly 2 years, I believed that love meant sacrifice, that if I just behaved the right way, stayed quiet enough, small enough, good enough, I would be accepted, that I could earn kindness. I was wrong. What I lived through wasn't tradition. It was abuse." She paused. "And I'm not the only one." The judge asked for order when murmurs rippled through the room. Ivy looked calm, grounded even. She had told her truth, and this time, no one could lock her away for it. Lucinda's lawyers requested a recess. George sat with his face buried in his hands. By the end of the hearing, the case had been referred for formal trial. But Daniel didn't need a gavel to know the real verdict had already been delivered. 3 months later, the Monroe Room expanded. Volunteers from the community helped build a second unit. Donations came in quietly, mostly from former allies of the Hales, people who now wanted to distance themselves from scandal and attach their names to something real. Ivy continued speaking at legal conferences, universities, women's shelters. Her story became part of a national discussion about financial and emotional abuse in upper-class families. She didn't do it for fame. She did it because it was the kind of justice you couldn't file in court. Nathan, now a full-time member of Daniel's crew, became known for his steady hands and quieter humility. He still wore flannel shirts, but now they had paint on them, calluses too. The man who once walked between privilege and blindness now worked side by side with the same men who'd once mocked him. And Daniel? Daniel sat on his porch most nights with his tea, watching the lights of the Monroe room glow warmly across the yard. He didn't always speak. He didn't need to. He had fought his war, and this time the battle had ended with something better than vengeance. It ended with peace. One night, Ivy sent him a text after a long day at work. 3 women, 2 kids, and 1 elderly lady living here this month. You built more than a room, Dad. You built a future. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back slowly, "You're the one who gave it purpose. I just held the nails." He leaned back in his chair and smiled. Justice had been served. The good guys had won. And for once, that was more than just a story. It was the truth.